Chinese GP. First held in 2004, it returned to the calendar last year after missing 4 years due to COVID-19. A very comfortable win for Max Verstappen last time out, not only in the main race, but also in the sprint. And 2025 is a sprint race again. The track itself features a very difficult opening, a couple of corners where you've got a 270-degree right-hander, turn 1 and turn 2. And it also features one of the longest straights on the calendar, heading into a lot of overtaking opportunities at turn 14. Something that has been at the forefront of the news over the last couple of days that is different this weekend from last weekend is the FIA enforcing stricter rear wing flexibility tests on the cars. Initially, the sports governing body had planned to introduce a new test at the Spanish GP in June, which would have been the 9th round of the championship. However, after reviewing data from last weekend's race in Melbourne, it's decided to implement a new test with immediate effect. Sam, we're seeing that we've got 2 millimeters of flexibility allowed down to 0.5 millimeters. Again, this was planned to be introduced just much later than this weekend. Before we head into who this might benefit, who might not like this as much, why have they done it?
I mean, if you don't know what this is, folks, in layman's terms, because I'm sure we are the biggest morons you can listen to, so we'll try and break it down to our own terms. This is essentially when a lot of the pressure from the air, when you go very quick, pushes the rear wing in a certain direction, and it causes essentially the rear wing to tip open, forcing a gap open, essentially creating a mini DRS. Now, mini DRS means that the air will flow through the gap rather than hitting the car, meaning you go faster in a straight line. This was something that was addressed during the season last year. I think McLaren had to make some changes to this, and it's been addressed very quickly again, arguably after, I believe it's rumored that Red Bull made a complaint and that McLaren were deemed to have a significant advantage, which may be caused via this mini DRS. The FIA have seemingly realized that this is actually quite disastrous, perhaps, for the way that the competition will look for 2025. And I don't think I've ever seen the FIA act so quick on a regulation to make changes. It is very difficult to run any checks, to run their tests, to make sure you're compliant, because not only are we at the start of the season where lots of engineering parts may have been created and a flow may have been put in place and they were working towards a certain deadline later on in the season, but you've got to remember that we are on the other side of the world from every single Formula One's base here. Everyone is either situated in Britain, a couple of teams in Italy, and of course Haas in the States. So to fly out parts that might not be correct or need to be replaced is very, very difficult. In less than a week between Australia and China, this is a real issue. So the FIA must have seen this, realized it was creating a real gap in the competitive side of the sport, and decided to clamp down on this so early to ensure that actually the field really does tighten up again right at the very start of the season.
Harry, what are your thoughts on this one? It seems to be a bit of a hot topic amongst the top teams, but again, not expected to see change until round 9. Instead, we head into round 2 and there'll be change.
This feels like we've spoken about this before. I guess it was more to do with the front wing, but they were a bit slow on the uptake with this, new technical directive previously, and I think they have been caught with their pants pulled down slightly and didn't expect. There was rumors about this in testing, but I'm not sure. People expected or could have guessed to the extent that this was being done, and the FIA don't like it by the looks of it. So. It's very interesting they've clamped down so quickly on this, and also, if they can, why have they not been like this in the past? But never mind. You can be better now. That's fine. But yeah, it's clearly they're worried about some imbalance in performance between teams. I think McLaren are the obvious culprits here, but I don't believe it's just them doing it. So. Yeah, very interesting. As you say, Sam, it's a tricky challenge for those teams that are utilising this trick, because what are you going to do? You've got to start running your car on Friday and it has to be legal. So that's going to be an odd situation. And it's not even like they'll have spares that don't do this, because this is the start of the season. All their spares will be doing the same thing. So I don't know. You have to bolt the wings together. They don't do it. I don't know.
you put that alongside the fact that, of course, we have a sprint race weekend, you get one practice session at China this weekend. So where you normally have three, for example, at Australia, you're going to a track that is very straight line dependent, unlike Australia. So having a rear wing that allows more air through is definitely more potent, definitely more advantageous. You get 1 hour to ensure that it's actually going to be working, plus trying to test everything else in your car that includes the setup. This is an incredibly tricky situation for any of these teams that are currently not meeting the new regulations put in place by the FIA.
I forgot it's a sprint weekend.
Yeah, have fun at that. Do you know what time it is in the morning?
No.
Go on, Ben. 3 a.m.
Yeah.
We're not complaining. Just letting you know, just for information purposes.
I'm complaining that sucks.
I think the FIA might feel a bit silly because they did implement changes before the season started, just not the tests relating to the rear wing. And I think they've just been duped by the teams here, where obviously the objective of the test is to ensure that these teams aren't gaining an unfair advantage in terms of, as Sam, you put it, the mini DRS. And it just feels as if at least McLaren and probably other teams have managed to find a way to pass the test whilst also still gaining the initiative that they were gaining last season. And if you really thought that the best aerodynamicists in the world with a few months to play with weren't going to come up with a solution that could do this, I think you might be a bit foolish. So, yeah, I do think the FIA don't look great coming out of this. I do find it very interesting that they've decided to do this weekend. Of course, it is back-to-back to start this year. I figured if they were going to do something drastic, they might do it between China and Japan for the same reasons that you've both stated, in that no teams are situated out in Australia or Asia. They're all situated pretty much in Europe. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see if all teams can adjust. Maybe the FIA have made this change this weekend because they are confident that all 10 teams will be able to do so. They did say in their statement as well, the FIA, that all 10 teams were in compliance with the regulations in Australia. So they were all within 2 millimeters. And there is something different for China in that they have an extra 0.25 millimeter leeway that they won't have at future races. So maybe they think that is enough of a compromise. But yeah, I do think this is going to be very interesting indeed. Sam, does this give a bad look on the FIA with it coming off the first race of the season where McLaren looked very dominant, and we believe McLaren are probably taking advantage of this more than other teams? Even if they didn't do it for this reason, does it look like the FIA have gone, ooh, no, thank you, we want a really good season?
Yeah, I mean, you already mentioned the naivety of giving Formula One teams a set of regulations and not expecting a group of people famous for reading around the regulations to not then read around the regulations. I think Adrian Newey came out and once said, it's not my job to understand the regulations, it's my job to understand the parts that the regulations don't cover. Essentially, what can I make for a Formula One car that break the rules without actually breaking the rules, allowing us to go faster? This is what Formula One teams will do. This is essentially their bread and butter. How do I make my car faster where other teams haven't thought to do so? It is not a good look where the moment you've had the first race where everyone, new fans of F1, old heads like ourselves, have come into a new season and thought, this is going to be that final season of the regulation. It's going to be really tight. We're going to have another absolute banger. And then all of a sudden, McLaren walking and they've got a 4/10 advantage around a track like Albert Park, which is pretty sizable. It does look like they've gone, we probably should artificially close the gap now, actually, so it's a bit more spicy for the rest of the season, and we all get a good time watching lots of racing. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm all up for closer racing, but having it made such a rash decision when you already put a plan in place for Spain for this to be counteracted where teams could match it, it feels a bit odd that you've then immediately retracted that and brought it to the second race of the season. Clearly, you hadn't thought about the consequences of your actions before applying them to the season.
Harry, do McLaren stand to lose the most in all this?
I mean, yes, potentially. I think often a lot is made of like technical directives like this. It was the same, for example, when, Brawn had the double diffuser, and actually there were so many other things that were on that car that made it a good car. You could have got rid of the double diffuser, and yes, it would have hampered performance, but it wouldn't have stopped them being good. And I think McLaren were probably in the same boat. It may bring them more into line with other teams, and I guess that's what the technical directive is for in that regard. But I don't think for people that are suggesting that car is only good because of this mini DRS, I think they'll be disappointed in that sense, because I don't think that's the only thing that makes it a good car. So yeah, I think they could be well be the ones that get most affected, but they're not the only ones there that are doing it. So if there are other people also having to do stuff, it's how you adapt to it, and McLaren may well adapt the best. They are the constructors champions. They've got a lot of resource, so who's to say it will actually change anything? We'll find out this weekend.
Rob Marshall for a reason, mate.
Well, exactly. He's got the scaffolding out to make sure it doesn't open up.
You think you can outsmart Rob Marshall? No such thing. Yeah, I'll be non-skeptical on this and say the FIA are doing this for genuine reasons rather than they just want to hamper McLaren's progress, because ultimately they have no idea whether a dominant start to McLaren might actually lead to a very good season. Like, Red Bull obviously had a very dominant start to 2024. We didn't know at that point, actually, that would cause something of an interesting close to the season. It might be the same this year. Like, McLaren might lose ground, not because of this, but for other reasons. And actually, the way in which they start the season is the thing that causes a dramatic season. So I'm going to say the FIA are doing it for the right reasons. In terms of whether McLaren will lose out the most, I suspect yes, but I think the bigger question is how much do they lose out? I think it won't be as much as people think it will be. I still think they will have an advantage, just maybe not quite as much of an advantage as they had at Australia. If you remember back to 2024 and around the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, or race won by Oscar Piastri, there was a lot of conversation about this back then. And the response to that was a slight change in the regulations. Now, at the time, Zach Brown and Andrea Stella were very much in the corner of this. I think Andrea Stella actually called it a red herring in that, well, it hasn't affected our performance. Now that things have changed, we're still very good. And I think he was right to an extent. Although after Azerbaijan, Singapore didn't really count because they wouldn't have used the wing anyway. But when we went into the United States, Austin and Mexico, they did lose a bit of ground to Ferrari. So I think, yes, they will lose ground. Will it be enough to dethrone them? Probably not. Given, Sam, that you've already mentioned that Red Bull haven't been particularly happy about this, do they therefore think they might gain the most of the top teams?
Well, I mean, they'd be silly to force this through with the FIA and, stake a complaint for it to make things worse for them, wouldn't they?
That would be an embarrassment.
Yeah,
that
really would.
A real embarrassment.
If they get to China and McLaren go, we are now, we're not just 0.75, we're 0.5 millimeter, we fully comply, and they go and they're 0.5 a lap faster than Red Bull in qualifying, there's a problem there that Red Bull aren't noticing. And like you've already both mentioned, that McLaren isn't only fast because it's got a tiny little 2 millimeter gap in the rear wing once they go very, very quick. That car is brilliant through mid-speed corners. Look at how good it was through that final sector of Australia. That car knows how to keep its tyres alive and it can flow so well. And we've said this for a few years now. McLaren's strength is kind of mid to fast speed corners. Qatar was a fantastic race for them. The mid-section of Spa always went brilliantly for them as well. They were potent when it comes to Silverstone. Hungary is another one where they've absolutely excelled. These tracks all have something in common. Then it's the mid-speed corners that flow well. And China, in that mid-section of that track, basically from turns 3 all the way through to the big straight after the Anting corner. Got that in there. Thank you, everyone. It's completely flowing. There's pretty much not a slow corner in there. So I still think that if you take this tiny DRS away, they're going to have a real strength and they're going to be so tough to beat. So, yeah, Red Bull are going to hope that they're going to be a little bit closer. I cannot see this revolutionizing the grid. I really do think that McLaren is still going to be that team to beat. And actually, it might be someone more like Ferrari that we see be able to push into their strengths. And that Australia was a real tough one for them when they had some teething issues. Upgrading at work, they brought 2 or 3 performance upgrades to Australia after testing. Don't think they went properly to plan. Freddie Vass has come out and said, you're going to see the pure pace of the car. We're going to see it moving into China. I think they might be a little bit closer to the front than people expect now, rather than Red Bull.
Harry, have you got a team that you're looking at between, let's say, Red Bull, Mercedes and Ferrari, and think that maybe they could look more competitive than they did in Melbourne?
I think Ferrari, the obvious ones here, aren't they? The Red Bull is very hard to judge where it is after Melbourne because Max Verstappen was being Max Verstappen and Liam Lawson didn't do anything. So I don't actually know where that car is.
Showing your true colours, mate.
Oh, Liam Lawson hater.
Yeah,
as we all are on this podcast, if it's not Fernando Alonso or Lando Norris or Max Verstappen.
Cheers.
But yeah, so it's hard to know whether the Red Bull pace truly lies. As I now keep saying about Verstappen, it doesn't matter because he'll be hustling it anyway. Hustling. Mercedes looked solid after Australia, so Ferrari are the ones you've got to say who didn't really fulfill their potential. And if they can get on top of the tyre issues they had, at least in qualifying in Australia, the race should run better for them. So going by preseason testing, which you should never always go by preseason testing, but they certainly looked like at least the second behind McLaren, and obviously that didn't deliver in Australia. But like I said before, last week before Australia, the form book there doesn't exist. So I think we could probably, in terms of form book, decide that starts this weekend, and we'll see where we go from there. But you'd imagine that they would be further in the fight.
Okay, let's take our first break on this Chinese GP preview. On the other side, we're talking about the midfield. Woo! Welcome back, everyone. We've spoken about the sort of top four teams. Harry, I think we had an idea of what the top four teams were going to be. Not so certain on the order, but I think Australia probably confirmed that was right and that Mercedes, Red Bull, Ferrari and McLaren would be clear of the other six teams. But if we look a little bit further back, who do you think has the advantage? What maybe changed your opinions after testing versus after Melbourne?
I mean, Williams certainly look like they're going to be leading the midfield, don't they? That was a case of transferring testing pace into a race weekend, and actually potentially exceeding it in the case of Alex Albon. So you'd have to say Williams are the ones that are the favourites of that pack at the moment. What Williams needs to do is, and at least with Albon, they certainly secured a lot of points, but do not waste this opportunity, because I have no doubt, especially given their concentration on 2026, they're not going to do a whole amount to this car and that other teams will catch up. So whilst they have this good car, don't waste it, because I think later on in the year will be difficult, or more difficult than it is now. Anyway, so yeah, I think Williams was going to be there. I'm interested to see where Haas will line up, because I think they brought the 2021 Haas to Australia by accident. Because
I don't think they bought an F1.
It was a pile of poo. Yeah, I sincerely hope, and I think they will be back in the fight this weekend. Just given where they were last year, not a huge amount has changed. Although I guess you could argue the same for Williams. And then I guess your Aston Martin, your Alpines, and Yuki Tsunoda. We're kind of thereabouts in between. I'd be intrigued to see where Aston Martin end up, and the same for Alpine, I guess, with Pierre Gasly as well. But yeah, I think certainly Williams are going to be the ones leading the way.
Sam, if we have a look at Williams for the moment, do you think it's them that will hold the advantage?
They look very potent in Australia, and that came from both drivers. Despite Carlos Sainz not being able to finish the Grand Prix, the initial qualifying pace was strong. Neither of those two cars ever looked like they were going to fall out in Q1, for example. They looked very good in every session that they put forward. Albon was able to hold off the Ferrari. I know the conditions were tough, and Albert Park is famously quite difficult to get moves done on, but he was comfortably there. It's not like he was gripping on by his fingernails. I think that Carlos Sainz is still going to be finding his feet in that Williams. Despite doing a very good job, I still think he's going to get stronger and stronger and stronger. There's a lot of signs that point to Williams being currently the fifth fastest team. I don't know if they've got what it takes to challenge the kind of the upper echelons of the grid in terms of whoever might actually be the fourth fastest team. We're yet to kind of work that out finally. But Williams look like they're fairly comfortable sitting in fifth place. I do think that I've done some thinking I've done some soul searching
That's dangerous.
since Australia.
Very
It is me thinking it's not good. I think the racing bulls might be faster than they've initially given off. Sago did really well. The Rizzler didn't get the chance to actually...
Two dooms
for that formation lap. That's Isaac Hajar anyway. He was unable to get past the formation lap, but I think he showed great promise, and Yuki was just doing Yuki things. If they can work out the setups and just get a really comfortable flow going, I think the Racing Bulls have made really big gains over the kind of the pre-season into the new season, and actually might be a bit of a surprise, meaning that Haas, Sauber might genuinely be battling it out for that kind of 10th, 9th position, and that's a tough one for Haas to swallow.
Doesn't matter, mate, because Racing Bulls will introduce a upgrade in Spain, and then it will go to absolute poo.
That is how that works.
Yeah, I think based on testing plus Australia, it is Williams who hold that initiative, at least for now, in the midfield scrap. But I 100% agree with your point, Harry, that just because that's how it is now, that doesn't mean it's going to be that way halfway through the season or 3/4 of the way through the season. So they do need to take advantage of it, just like Alex Albon did in Australia, and ensure that they're racking up the points now. I do also think when it comes to the Williams lineup, whilst I agree Carlos Sainz is going to need a little bit of time to adjust to the new car, they still do hold an experience advantage over most of their rivals in the midfield. If you think nearly all of the other teams have a rookie in one of the two seats. Albon's been around for quite a long time. Sainz is somehow the fourth oldest driver on the grid, which still makes me vomit. But they have got an experienced lineup at this point, and early in the season is when you can really capitalize on that. The long run pace in Australia was difficult to judge. I know Alex Albon did a pretty good job fighting in the midfield. We obviously gave him driver of the day, did a wonderful job. But because of the conditions, it was more difficult to judge the long run pace than it would have been if it was a dry weekend. But having said that, they still did, when it was drier in the practice sessions, they did look not only competitive, they did look to be leading that midfield. So I would agree that they seem to be in fifth at the moment. Sam, you mentioned that Racing Bulls perhaps have exceeded your early expectations of where they might have been. Have Alpine gone the other way a little bit?
I think Alpine was made to look a little bit better than it was by Gasly. Pierre Gasly is a very experienced hand. We know his raw pace is still phenomenal. And he's very comfortable in that Alpine team now. It's very much his team. Doohan, I think, showed what is the standard pace for Alpine, sitting around the Aston Martin, maybe fighting for that 7th, 8th place in the constructors. And Gasly, I think, elevated that. It'll be interesting to see what development Alpine make throughout the season. They are still a team that's trying to get back on the up. They had a great end to the season last time out with both Ocon and Gasly doing brilliantly in Brazil and Gasly regularly scoring top 10 finishes towards the end of the season. Whether they can carry on that development, because they seemingly have taken a small step back in comparison to the rest of the teams around them, will be interesting to see. But I think it is more on Gasly's ability than it is on the car to be fighting for that 5th fastest team right now.
What do you think about that sort of group, Harry? It looks fairly close. Do you think that, obviously, Gasly has shown over the last couple of years what a great driver he can be in the Alpine and I think his pace was, even though it didn't go very well in the race itself, looked pretty good up until that point. Are they poised for a little bit of a bounce back after not scoring in Australia?
I think yes. I think potentially yes. I think where I can just see Gasly and Alonso. I know this doesn't reflect what happened in Australia given Stroll's result, but even before that happened, it was Gasly and Alonso, I think, dragging two cars that didn't deserve to necessarily be in the positions they were in. And I think that could be the story of the year. I think the Alpine probably is a bit better than the Aston Martin, so you'd have to say yes, they are poised for a bounce back, but it really depends because, again, form book from Australia isn't going to be the same. I don't think it is as it is in China. So I think difficult one to tell, but it's certainly pretty close for those last few points in the top 10.
Yeah, there's not much in it at all. And I was probably most intrigued about Alpine and Racing Bulls coming out of Australia, because it did seem, at least to an extent, like they'd flipped, or at least in the case of Yuki Tsunoda during the race itself, even though both of them have ultimately ended up with 0 points out of the weekend. From Alpine's perspective, I was happy with Doohan's pace. I know it didn't go well in the Grand Prix itself, but I said it on the review episode. I think I do think there are more encouraging signs than discouraging signs for Doohan that weekend. Gasly, he did get into Q3. I don't know if it was a Q3 car. We've seen what Gasly can do in qualifying. And given what Tsunoda and Albon were able to do in Q3 versus what Gasly was able to do, I do think, and fair play to him, but I think Gasly probably took advantage of the likes of Antonelli and Lawson performing below where their cars were capable of. Racing Bulls, yeah, they were quicker than I thought they were going to be, particularly over one lap. The one thing I'm not sure about is what their dry race pace is going to look like, because they did look a step down from Williams go through the practice sessions. And then in the race itself, sure, Tsunoda, similar to Albon, was able to do a good job mixing it with cars and drivers that maybe he shouldn't have been able to. But with dry conditions, DRS, would that have stuck? Very difficult to say. So I'm intrigued to see of those two teams who's looking ahead in China. Sam, how worried are you by Haas?
Yeah, I'm really hoping this is an outlier. Komatsu was so promising last season when he came into that role. And after understanding how tyres work, which is really good for Formula One cars if you're new to the sport, seemingly creating a car that is very stable and able to produce strong race pace. And we didn't see the cars fall back after a good qualifying because all they had was one lap pace where the tyres could just disintegrate. After having a team that, you've had wholesale changes in driver lineup, but Ocon is a dab hand at racing these days. And Behrman is very promising. We saw how good he was, in Saudi. And even when he came in at the likes of Baku for Haas last season, he's got it in him. And I think he did a good job keeping the car on track in Australia in those tricky conditions. It worries me that realistically, if they can't swap that setup, and actually it was just something that they fundamentally got wrong with that car after all the new hires, after the investment, after the work with Toyota, with the simulator, it worries me that Haas have maybe sat down in a simulator for the first time and gone, how does this work? I don't understand what I'm doing. And it's just
simulator.
It's gone completely the wrong way. I don't know. But I'm worried. I'm worried. And they need to have an immediate response after what happened in Australia. Otherwise, this is going to be a really, really difficult year for them. And poor Ocon's going to have another season of driving around an absolute tractor.
Yeah, it wasn't great, was it? No. I feel like I said during our Pimp My F1 livery episode that Haas looks incredible, and in the best way possible, it looks like the Midland from 2005. It might actually be the Midland from 2005. That's the issue, because that didn't look good at all. I know that last year in testing, they had a similar plan of working on the tyres, the long run pace, not being bothered by one lap pace. But then they went into the first few races of the season and you could tell what they were doing. They scored points in 3 of the first 5 races, I think, last year. And even Bahrain was the first race last year. Hulkenberg put it in Q3. And it was only an error where he went into Lance Stroll that really cost him an opportunity at points there. This year, just to summarize what they did in Australia, FP1, 19th and 20th. Ocon in 19th was half a second away from 18th place. Not great. FP2, Behrman didn't compete because the car wasn't in a state to compete. Ocon, though, was 19th. That time he was only 2 tenths away from 18th, so we're making progress here.
Great improvement.
Yeah. FP3, improvement again. They finished 18th and 19th because Lawson didn't do more than 2 laps. And then in qualifying, Behrman didn't even get to compete because of his gearbox, and Ocon was 19th, and he was 0.6 seconds away from getting out of Q1. As far as weekends go, not great.
You know what? I'll give that a 1-word review. Slow.
Oh, mine was bad, but slow also counts.
I'll take it.
The biggest issue seems to be high-speed corners, in that they're not high-speed corners for them. They're low-speed corners. The good news is there aren't quite as many at China compared to Australia, so they might fare a little bit better this weekend. But equally, if they don't get that fixed for Suzuka, they might as well not turn up. They will 130R will quickly become a 13.0R by their standards. Like that ain't gonna work. So
it'll be like trying to get a lorry down the back roads of Foy in tourism season.
Wow, that's a niche reference.
What do you mean? Everyone's experienced that. Not a niche reference whatsoever. Shall we do some bold predictions?
Oh,
it went so well last week.
Yeah.
Gather around, little children, and listen to my song. My F1 bold predictions, and how they'll all be wrong.
So, speaking of wrong, they were all wrong last week, and spectacularly so. Harry, we were on the same sort of train of thought, and we picked the wrong Williams driver, I'm afraid. But what have you got this week?
Neither McLaren will be on the podium.
Great.
Oh.
I'm assuming you mean the main race, because now, of course, they will be outside the top three in the sprint. But
I really want that to happen now.
I'll say the main race.
Doesn't count for your bold prediction, but why?
I don't know.
I just wanted to say something bold.
No, I don't think anything particularly bad is going to happen to him. I think maybe there will be a slight drop in pace for them with this new technical directive. And I say drop in pace versus everyone else. And they can be silly still.
They still find a way. So neither McLaren in the top three in the main race on Sunday. Sam, you went with an Australian to win the Australian Grand Prix. I hope you haven't gone for a Chinese driver to win the Chinese Grand Prix, or you're going to be very disappointed. But what is your bold prediction?
What? Why? That's
Zhou Guan Yu's not there anymore.
Oh, I thought he got a special little podium on the grid. Damn it. My bold prediction. Mercedes will not score more than 20 points across the whole weekend. Yeah, do the maths.
How many did they score? They scored 27, right? In
one race in Australia.
Oh, across the weekend as well. I understand.
Took a lot for them to get 27. 20 points. All right. Ben's
deciding whether he's allowing it or not.
What do you mean? What do you mean fourth and fifth alone is more than that?
Ben's on the fence about this. I can tell.
Fair enough. My bold prediction is that someone is unhappy after, this isn't the bold prediction, but someone is unhappy after Australia, and that man is Fernando Alonso. I've seen a lot of jokes about Fernando Alonso on the internet this week regarding, he was asked about what advantage he has over some of the rookies, or if he was worried about the rookies and having drivers racing against him that were born in 2005 and 2006. And he's like, well, I've got an advantage. I know all these circuits like the back of my hand, and it just pans to him crashing. And I don't think he'll like that very much. So I've got a bit of a bounce back weekend for him. He's going to be top 8 in both races.
Ooh. Okay.
Yeah. All right.
Scores points in both races in an Aston Martin.
Yeah, he weren't far off in the main race in Australia, but okay.
He was in the wall, mate.
No, but come on.
Oh, well.
He's driving around in 10th and 11th, so it's not that. It's fine.
If you get it, why you both settled it, they're both crap. Move on. You both have terrible bold predictions, and we move.
I love that the only one that is overly bold has no logic behind it.
Who said?
You honestly don't think Alonso top 8 in both races isn't bold? Like I'd be shocked if that happened.
I think it's ambitious. I don't think it's overly bold.
We'll just rename the segment to ambitious predictions.
Yeah, all right. You got a deal.
As a nice ring to it. Poll 1, 2, 3. Harry.
Are we doing sprint?
Yeah, if you want to.
Do I?
If you want to.
Producer Gus is nodding ahead, so fine. Sprint poll, I'm giving that to Charles Leclerc. And the sprint win, I'm also going to give to Charles Leclerc. Poll, sorry, I can remember what happened next. Poll for the main race, I'm giving it to Charles Leclerc again. But the win's going to go to Lewis Hamilton. Second place will be Charles Leclerc, and third will be the burglar, George Russell, for those concerned.
I wish anyone was concerned.
I was really worried.
I'm being burgled.
Ben was.
I was frightened. Sam, sprint pole, sprint win, pole 1, 2, 3.
Sprint pole is going to be Lando Norris. Sprint wing is going to be Lando Norris. Pole is going to be Charles Leclerc. Wing is going to be Piastri. Then it's going to be Norris. Then it's going to be Leclerc.
Are you going to predict Piastri to win the race until he actually wins one this season?
Maybe I should do
Yeah.
that.
I'm going with sprint pole, Max Verstappen. Sprint win, Lando Norris. Pole, Lando Norris. Win, Max Verstappen. Second, Lando Norris. Third, Oscar Piastri.
We have all gone for something different. Well done.
Well
Well
us.
done, us.